promise you that these will not leak. They're really well sealed and they'll be really well serviceable in the future. Hi guys, Brett here from Hearns Hobbies, and today we're going to undertake episode 2 of building our HB Racing E819RS buggy. So in the first step we got the shocks done. I polished the shock shafts, assembled the cartridges and filed in some little notches onto the spring preload collars. That's all assembled and they're beautiful, silky smooth. Now it's time for the next step. Now this is into bag B, and bag B is all diffs. Now there's a few extra measures I like to take apart from just assemble them as the book says. So let's jump in to bag B and have a look what we're up against. Just get my hobby knife here, like so. All right. Got bag B3, B2 and B1. Nothing like the bananas. Alright, so bag B1 and bag B2 are the same. So that will be the front and rear diffs. Bag 3, however, will be a little bit different in that the spur gear is in that bag and ready to go. So all the other parts of the diff internals are the same. But yeah, as long as we're keeping that into mind, because we are going to use different diff oils. And I'm going to use diff oils that I've found work well for me in the local conditions here in Victoria. They might not be right for everybody, but you know what? It's a tuning option. It's good fun to play around with and learn. So here we go, breaking into the B1 bag. I'm going to pull the parts out. First thing I'll do is I'll make sure everything is there and safe. Keeping everything to the side. Get our crown wheel out. Beautifully machined crown wheels here. Hardened, machined. Really, really nice. Top quality from HB Racing. We've got our lightened out drives. Again, you can really see the precision machining. They're not something that wears very fast. And we've got our hardened gears, steel gears, rubber seal bearings and our shims. Okay, so we've got that diff there. Now one thing that I like to do on my diffs is I take a tiny little bit of precaution and I actually glue the casing and the boss together where the outdrive comes out. Now not that I've ever had leaks from there, but it just ensures against it. So if it's going to potentially take away a problem, I'm a big fan of doing it, and I can rest assured that it will never give me grief. And what that involves is literally just putting a drop or two of the thinnest super glue you've got, and for this one I'm using the Yokomo glue. I just put that on the casing. You don't really need very much at all, and it's just to ensure that that seam is reinforced. I just need to get the tiniest amount out. Like so. Just where the metal meets the plastic. Doesn't need to be a pull or anything. And like I said, not that I've ever had a problem, but it just ensures that I never will. Perfect. You can see there how it's nice and glossy, and that is all we want, and that is the thinnest super glue possible, and I'll do that on all 3 diff cases. So, and this is why it's good to have a nice big flat area and also a shock or diff rebuilding stand to ensure that you can keep them separated at all times. Here we go. Get the contents of this diff out. This is B2. Go ahead here, get the crown wheel. And again, first thing I do is with the super glue. And because it's such an ultra fine super glue, it really does just dry in minutes. Like so. And the reason I'm using the thinnest glue available is just to ensure that it does penetrate and seal that seam perfectly. All right, there's diff number 2. Diff number 3. This one here is the center diff. We'll keep this stuff over here. Again, like I said, the only difference between these diffs is the fact that whether it's got a crown wheel mounted to it or the spur gear. It's got a heavy duty 48 tooth spur gear on here. Mod 1 pitch, being electric. The electrics actually run a more aggressive Mod 1 pitch than the preferred 0.8 module pitch on the nitro, and that's just because the electrics have just got that much grunt and torque off the bottom, off the closed throttle, that you really need big chunky gears to absorb all that load. Okay, there we go. We've applied our super glue. Just going to give that a wipe over and seal that back up. And like I said, that's the Yokomo super glue. Really, really good stuff. Use that on all of my tires and repairs. Works faultlessly. Okay, now the next step that I will do is I will actually put a little bit of blue tack, or my 9 steps cleaning putty, within the diff case. And I'll start here at the first diff case, because what I want to make sure is that nothing can get in there, because the next step, what I'm about to do, can in fact put some debris within, and I want to keep it spotlessly clean. So just take a little bit of the blue tack putty here, and I'll put it in the diff housing. I definitely don't want it to be over full, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to tap these threads, and I'm going to take this Aeromax taper tool and tap them. Now the reason I do that is because I want these diff bolts that hold these housings together to have a really good thread and be able to apply maximum torque to ensure that there's no leakage, no chance of cracking their housings. And I find it best if we can tap it out. That way we've got the best feel on the screws as well. Just like so. That's one done. And I'm just winding that through. And we're actually cutting a thread into it. So that saves me having to assemble it with a cordless drill or struggle and do it by hand, and potentially wrecking my Allen key driver and the tip of the screw, because the head of the screw has to put up with all that torque. So I'm cutting this thread now, and that will ensure that it's actually cutting the thread and not just binding the screw into place. I'm going to come here, let's give myself a little bit more room here. There we go. And I'm going to do that to all 4 screw holes. It's not the most exciting thing to watch, and it's not something that everybody do. Most people just get their cordless drill out now and bang the diff housing together. But it's these little things that you can do to your car to make sure that it's built the best that you can. And like I said, it makes servicing easier too. So when it comes time to rebuild your diff oil, you can just unwind it by hand. You don't need a cordless drill to work on your car. And you shouldn't have to either. If you build it right and cut the threads in, should be all a matter. And then you can feel when it's tight as well, not just binding it the whole way in. Winding that one in. This is the last one. And that is going to leave the holes nice and clean. And then there's one last step I do on my housings. We'll tap that out and I'll get all my swarf off of the mat. Got a bit of emery paper here, and what I'm going to do is I like to do it on a bit of glass, but this nice flat table is okay. Is I'm going to surface the face. I've just got a bit of simple green now. I'm just going to surface the face where the gasket's going to sit, and I'm just using a light circular motion, even pressure. Not really trying to remove any material, because that can change the preload within the diff. Just taking off any imperfections of the surface face, ensuring me that I've got a perfect seal on my gasket when it comes together. And that's just a bit of 600 grit. Just wipe it off. And we can see here, as opposed to one that I haven't done, that it's a nice matte finish, and I've taken any marks, any flashing, anything like that off, and I've got a perfectly flat sealing surface for the gasket. A little bit more. Like so. And I repeat that for all 3 differentials. Give that a little wipe over. Then I should be fine to get my blue tack out of there, and that saved anything from actually any debris or dirt actually going in there. And the beauty about blue tack or this cleaning putty is that it sticks to itself and it doesn't leave anything behind. Just having a look in there. Just go around like that. Like so, and we can be sure now that our diff is going to have the best chance to work as freely as it can. Alright, there's no debris in there, that is spotless. We've cleaned that. The super glue now is now dry. So now we're going to follow the instructions. So the first thing I'm going to start by doing is putting on the bearing onto the diff case. Now before I insert my outdrive, I'm going to use a couple of kinds of grease here. First one is the white grease, and that is really good for the metal. That's a lithium grease, so that is going to lubricate the outdrive into the diff housing, because it is actually metal there. And the second one's going to be an O-ring grease on the inside of the diff, and it's going to ensure that the fluid is not acting against the O-ring and causing it to swell at all. Well, it's trying to aid that. Okay, so I'm not going to put my shim on now. I can put that on after. So I can go ahead and grease that. You don't need to put too much. It will come out anyway. Just like so. A little bit of grease on there, and assemble it into the diff case. Like so. I've got my 7mm box wrench somewhere. Here we go. Make sure that's nice and clean. Yep. I find that a 7mm wheel wrench is really handy for this. Now I'll wipe off the excess. I'm just looking for my other gizmo. Here it is. It's mixing in. So I've got my O-ring. I'm just putting it in the O-ring, the rubber grease here, making sure that it's all coated, and I'm going to go ahead and put that over the outdrive, and then I'm going to push that down with the 7mm wrench and get that sitting into the groove, and that is sitting beautifully. So the next step is to put the pin in. Now the pin in these actually comes in through the side hole, where we will put a grub screw after. And then for this one, I actually just use tweezers or little pliers just to line this pin up and get it sitting nice. Like so. If I can just get that pin started. And the grease ensures that the pin is not going to damage that O-ring at all. There we go. And I can go ahead and put that and see that the pin itself is acting on the grease. Good build. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do for this diff housing is put in the grub screw. Now in this I'm going to use a little bit of assembly grease, a silicone grease for this one. Let's get my Allen key, 2 more Allen key, just put a little bit here. I like to use a little bit of grease on all my threads just so they sit nicer and add to the sealing properties of it. And this grub screw goes in, and I want to make sure that it goes in nice and straight, but not too much that it comes through. I want it to sit flush, and I can use the back of my tweezers or a hobby knife to ensure that the grub screw is flush with the inside of the diff housing without it protruding and adding preload onto the little gears in there. Okay, before I go any further, I'm going to get my stand ready that's got my shocks on it. I'm going to turn that around. I'm going to use this other side of the shock stand to get these diffs ready. Okay, now I'm going to put 8,000 weight diff oil in the front housing. Now I like to put a little bit in first, then I'm going to put the first gear in, get it all set in there nice. I'm going to put a little bit more, put it where the cross pins go. The main thing when you're assembling your diff housings is you want to make sure you don't get it in the threads where you're going to pull down the crown wheel. Here we go. Just wiping it, giving ourselves a nice clean surface. There we go, we've got a bit of oil in there. I can put that in my stand and start working on the cross pins and getting the gears ready. So I like to stack this one up before I assemble the other half of the diff housing. So we'll put our gears in, little bevels, put our washers on. I generally don't lubricate these or polish these as I build them. I will, however, on first rebuild, potentially polish and reface these shims, making sure that they're all smooth and burr free. And that is as simple as just dropping that in there. Okay, the next stack, assemble this one. Helps to pick up these. A pit mat does wonders for this, a good quality pit mat. Got this one in. Okay, go ahead and put this in and ensure that I've got the correct mesh. Go ahead and push that in, making sure that it's all sitting well. And then I'll put my finger in there and just make sure that all the gears are mating and are in mesh and not binding, which they are. That's perfect. I'll give that a little wipe. I'll put some more fluid in there. Like I said, I'm going to put 8,000 in the front diff, 8,000 in the center diff, and 4,000 lighter in the rear. Okay, I'll let that one bleed of air. While it's bleeding, we'll go ahead and assemble the other side of the diff outdrive. Again, the same process. Put a little bit of the lithium grease on in that groove, because you don't want that to run dry. Like so. Then I've got the O-ring in the O-ring grease. Whoops, careful not to lose the O-ring. Where's it gone? It's in there somewhere. Here we go. Like so. Press that one down, and then I'll seat that with the 7mm. Works really nice over here. Wipe off the excess. Get that O-ring seated. Then I'll go ahead and put my pin in. And this one should just locate fairly easily if I can see it from the grease in here. Like so. And you want to get that nice and central to ensure that it does sit 100%. And make sure that it's nice and easy to put your gear on. Like so. There we go. Okay, now the next step I like to do is in fact drop in the gear, top gear, and then I'll just line it all up so I know that it's straight. I'll put another drop of oil. Now it's had plenty of time to bleed. You can leave it for half an hour, even overnight, or put it in an oil pump, but for the process of this video I'm just gonna leave it here and move on to the next diff. So I know that these screws here and this gasket all go with this front diff. I'm going to put the front diff here, the crown wheel gear. Okay, next one I'm going to move to is the center diff. Okay, again I'm going to use exactly the same process. You can see it's quite time consuming. Now I've already glued the housing. Go ahead and put my cleaning putty in there. Again, just to ensure that no debris can get in there. Got my M3 tap, and then I'll go ahead and tap out the holes. Like so. Now you probably can use a machine tap, like an attachment on a cordless drill or a cordless screwdriver. Yeah, I don't know. I don't mind doing it by hand. I find it quite rewarding building these buggies by hand. And then, like I said, by doing this, when it comes time to rebuild, service and repair, it really makes it a dream to work on. Because the HB plastics are amazingly strong, which is a really good thing. But if you're not going to tap your threads, you really are in a position where you can't really hand assemble them from new. You've really got to use a cordless screwdriver or an electric screwdriver. It doesn't have to be cordless, but yeah, a power assisted screwdriver. Okay, get this one in. Got a little bit of diff grease on my hands. Here we go. And it does only take a few extra minutes to add these little touches, but it can make the difference between slapping a car together and properly building it. Here we go. Tap the third hole. Working our way through it. Like so. All right. Last one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, when you're tapping it by hand, you just want to ensure that the tap is straight. These are taper taps, so they're pretty much self-explanatory. They usually go into a pre-drilled hole really nicely. There's two sizes that I carry in my toolbox, a 3mm and a 4mm, because when it comes time to do the gearbox casings up to the chassis, we're faced with the same problem of having really tight threads. And again, it just lets you know that you're doing the screw up tight and not just binding it into what the housing or the plastic that you're screwing it into. That is the fourth one done. Give it a little tap. Okay, put this off to the side, and again, just get a little bit of simple green, or you can use like a WD-40 or anything, a bit of wet and dry. Just a nice circular motion, even a figure 8 motion's even better. Main thing is you just do it light. There's no need to rush it. There's no need to use really coarse emery. We're just trying to get all the factory marks and machining, making sure that our gasket surface is immaculate. These diffs will not leak. I've never assembled a diff on a HB that's ever leaked. Okay. Now I can just double check it here, the factory marks, making sure that it's all beautifully matte. There's no debris, there's nothing sticking up. Perfect. Like I said, we weren't really in a scenario where we're trying to remove material, just trying to make sure that we give ourselves a really nice surface to mate our gasket. Okay, so we've got our front done. Now we're working on our center. Go ahead and get the cleaning putty out. There we go. Just ensure that there's no debris left behind. Perfect, it is spotless. That's what we want to see. Okay, now we can carry on with the rest of the assembly. Exactly the same as the other one. So, we'll put the bearing on the housing. A little bit of lithium grease on the outdrive. Just to get into that groove. Make sure there's no metal to metal binding. Next step, O-ring. My O-ring grease here. A nice coat there. Put the O-ring in. Perfect. Seat that O-ring in its little recess. like so, and then we'll put our gear pin in. And you can really see the quality of the HB racing cars when you build them and work on them. They're just a pleasure to work on. They really just go together so easily. And although I'm taking a few extra steps here, they don't really require any extra hand finishing or fitting to make things fit. I will expect these diffs to be a little bit on the tight side mesh wise. They do build a little bit tight and maybe ever so slightly notchy, but after you've run the buggy in, whether it's nitro or electric, they free up beautifully. Give it a rebuild, clean the oil, and then they will last like that the life of the car, as long as you carry out your basic service and maintenance. A little bit of assembly lube on my grub screw here, making sure that it goes in nice and straight. There we go. Wind it in until it sits flush with the inner gearbox housing. There we go. And that is sealed up. Okay, now what I can do is start applying some oil. In the center one, again, front and center is going to be the same. So 8,000 weight oil in this setup that I'm using. Get it located. You can feel the gear drop in like so. Push the oil out. A little bit more oil in there. Then we can start on our gear sets. Bevel, shim, bevel, shim. Like so, put it straight in the gearbox housing. Now, these are hard anodized aluminium gear diff cross pins. So you can see that it's a quality component, quality machine componentry the whole way through. So it's super light, that cross pin, and it's, like I said, it's hard anodized for great wearing. As long as you keep the oil nice in your diffs, the gears and the cross pins will last the life of the car. They fit in the housings really nice. I've seen people sort of Dremel down, put a bevel lip on the edge of them and stuff, but I really haven't had a problem at all. They sit together really nice. They drop in their housings and go together really nice. Making sure these cross pins sit nice. Pushing it down with a plastic tool. Don't really want to use metal tools in there if I can help it. Risk scratching the anodizing. And then again, I'll just give it half a turn, make sure that everything's meshing nicely. And then I'll continue to fill it with oil. I'll go ahead and put the gear in. Like so, and again I'll just give it a little turn until I can line it up, so I know when I put the top in which orientation the drive pin's in. A little bit more oil. Then after this is done, I won't be putting any more oil in it and let all the air come out of the diff itself, letting it bleed. Need a little bit more oil in it. letting it sit while we're assembling the other diffs is usually enough time. By the time we get back to it, it will be ready. Okay, so that is my front and center diff halves done. Now I can work on the center diff outdrive. Bearing on. Bit of ceramic grease. Then we've got our O-ring grease. Like so, all going together really nice. Got that O-ring seated nicely. Go ahead and put my drive pin in. You can see that's just pushing out a little bit of the excess grease, that's fine. Give that a little spin, make sure everything's seated nice. Make sure the drive pin's pretty central so it fits right on the gear. And there we go, there's our center diff. Okay, last but not least, the rear diff. Now this one's going to be a little bit different in that it's going to have 4,000 weight oil in it. A little bit lighter in the rear diff. Everybody has their own, I suppose, setup or the way they like to feel their car. I'm pretty new at 1/8 electric off-road, so I'm still learning and still finding my feet. But every time I make a change, I love to feel the difference in how the car is reacting. We're coming to winter here in the lower states of Australia, so it's going to be operating in pretty low temps. So usually I would run a 5,000 or a 6,000 rear diff, but being a winter build, and because I figured it's probably going to be a bit tight until I rebuild it, I'll go for the 4,000. The car will be fully stripped and rebuilt, including the diffs and gearboxes, after the first day out. So after it's done 5 or 6 runs on the track, it'll get a full strip down and re-blueprint, new oils, shim the gearboxes, everything. And then from then on, it's really just tuning and how you like to. I'll change the oil really either when the car's done another 10 runs or when I feel the need to change the diff oil thickness or hardness in tuning wise. Let's come along here. Again, just tapping out this diff case. And you'll see when I come to assemble it how easy that it actually assembles. The screws will go in by hand without little effort until it comes time to actually torque it down and seat the gasket. And these Aromax taps are super sharp. And because I never use it in metal or alloy or anything, it will last a very long time. Just into cutting threads into plastic. It does definitely give you a bit of a workout, especially if you've not used to working on your buggy. Okay. Here we go. Now they do give you oils in the kit, and which is fine. It's not that different. I don't think. I think it's 2,000 rear, 7,000 front, and 5,000. 7,000 center, 5,000 front. So like I said, it's, if you want to start there and work your way, I usually recommend building your first type of model as per the kit, so you can drive the car and feel it as they intended it, I suppose. But this not being my first E819RS and knowing what I'm expecting, this is exactly where I'll be starting. Good starting place. Here we go. That is, give it a little tap out. That is all four done. Okay, I'll wipe off a bit of that swarf. Won't be needing that again for the moment. Again, straight again with the wet and dry. A little bit of simple green. If I was doing something metal or something even more precise, I'd probably have the wet and dry on a piece of glass. But that's usually when I'm only doing something like the steel ball diff rings in a 10th scale car or something like that. I'm only using very light pressure. I keep rotating it, changing grip, changing direction. Again, they don't even talk about this step in the book, and it's something that probably a lot of people don't do, and they probably don't even have a problem. But like I said, it's just something that I like to do in the confidence that I know that my diffs will never leak. And then when I do rebuild them, 9 times out of 10 I can reuse the gaskets again because the surfaces are nice and flat. Give it a little just like so. Just that little bit extra peace of mind. And there we go. All right, so it's at this point now I can go ahead and get my putty out of there. Ensure that there's none left behind. There's no debris. Best thing about this, the putty, is that it does literally just suck any dirt and debris away from the surface without having to scrape or use a brush. There we go. All right, can pop that aside for the second. I'll go ahead and do it exactly the same way that I did the other two. Start with the bearing, outdrive, white grease, just enough to fill in that groove there. It's a really good little touch that they've put that groove there. That's exactly what it's for, is just to ensure that the lubrication will pull there and give it a nice little oil film or grease film to run on. Got one of my O-rings. Whoops. Get that lubed up. Sitting in situ. Drive pin in from the side, through the grub screw hole. Then with my Allen key or my, there we go, once it's in. Get it nice and central. Like so. Take off any extra grease. Now the reason I'm just fussy about getting that drive pin nice and central in the housing is because if it's not, it can really make getting the gear on a little bit tricky, and you wonder why. A little bit of assembly grease on my grub screw. Getting the grub screw in nice and square. And again, making sure I do the grub screw up tight enough that it's flush but not over tight, where it's coming through the casing and upsetting the mesh of my gears within my diff. Okay, bit of oil. Now like I said, this is a rear one having 4,000. Always like to put a little bit in at the start. Put in the first gear. Get it located. Get a little bit of grease on where the cross pins are going to go down. A little bit more in the middle. It's always easier to add it in than take it out. I just put little bit by little bit each part of the assembly. Crosspin's located nice. Again, just falling in the housing. Ensuring that none of the diff oil is going into the threads, because what that will do, that will cause the threads to strip, because as you tighten the screw down, the oil being that thick is that it can't really compress or come out anywhere, so you end up doing it up against effectively just trying to compress the oil, which doesn't compress very well, and it will lead you to stripping the thread without actually doing it up tight. So I've seen that happen a lot, especially in the smaller scale racing. If I can get this gear up, I've got a little bit of oil on my hands. Here we go. Got the shim on there, got the gear sets, cross pins. In we go. Oops. Here we go, what not to do. Making sure your shim stays on the cross pin as you're assembling it. Keeping it nice and level. Shouldn't need to bang it in or force it in any way. Get the flat parts like so. Now with my finger, I just put a little bit of downward pressure on it while getting the gears to sit, all sitting beautifully like so. I don't want to turn it over too much and churn up all the air in that oil. For 4,000 weight oil is pretty light anyway, bleeds pretty well. Making sure that none of that oil's going into the thread holes. Making sure that it's evenly distributed around the diff assembly. Like I said, this first lot of diff oil is only going to be in there no more than 3 to 6 batteries realistically, just enough to run it all in. Okay, that's the rear diff. Now I'll put that on the shock stand in front of the rear shocks, and that way I'll know that it is in fact the rear diff. and I will put a bit of paint pen on it after and label what's in there in case I forget, if I don't write it down on a setup sheet. That way when I come to rebuild I know what was in there. O-ring. Put an amount of grease on there. There we go. Pushing down that O-ring, making sure it seats nice before I go ahead and put the drive pin in. Again with my tweezers. Grease, making sure that it's all sitting in there nice. There's a bit of extra grease on that outdrive. I'll take that off now, that's just going to end up all over my hands later. It's always handy to have a couple of clean rags on hand as you're building one of these cars, to make sure you can wipe it off as you go. Okay, get that pin nice and central. Now by the time all this is finished, which is where we're at, it's time to return back to the front diff and put the final assembly excuse me, on that. Okay, so the first diff we started assembling was the front one. So I'm going to go ahead and get my 2mm Allen key if I can. Where did I put it? 2.5. Here it is. Make sure it's nice and clean. Now, I'll finish with the rubber grease for the moment, so I'm going to go ahead and pop that away. Want to make sure it doesn't get contaminated with anything. Finish with ceramic grease, lithium grease. Go ahead and put that one away. Now I've got a bit of assembly lube here, or you can use Vaseline for this. And what I'm going to do is just put some on the gasket surface. Just going to use my plastic tools here, the gizmos, and I'm just going to put it on the face of the gasket. That's just going to aid the sealing. Put that a little bit on both sides. You don't need to put so much that it's just going to squeeze out everywhere. Just enough to aid the sealing properties of the gasket. And it will usually save it sticking to the plastic, because these diffs and the gears do get quite hot. It saves baking onto their housings and tearing when it comes rebuild time. Okay, so a little smear of grease there. I've got my first diff here, the front diff. Go ahead and I'll place the gasket on there. Then I'll go ahead and I'll line up the gasket with the pin, because I know which way that's sitting, making sure again my pin hasn't moved at all. And then it should be a matter of just dropping this in very carefully. Like so. There we go. Dropping it all in, getting the holes all lined up. And then what I'm going to do is start these screws little by little. And you'll see now how easy they'll wind in. Put a little tiny bit of assembly grease on these screws. And they just go in with your fingers. Where usually these threads would be really, really tight to cut in. Do them up in a cross pattern. Like so. Oops. And the reason I'm quickly getting those screws in there just a little bit is in case I go ahead and squeeze any excess oil or air out of the diff, I don't want it to be getting into my holes where my screws have got to go. So now that that's sealed up, I can start to bring the screws down a bit. Like so. Want to be keeping it nice and flat. You can see how easy they're doing up. And I can feel exactly the point where the face is hitting the gear, the back of the crown wheel, instead of the whole thing just binding up. And I'll get all the screws seated, doing them up nice and evenly, just getting them to meet and seat. Before I actually spin the diff over and make sure that yes, everything has aligned perfectly and the diff is good. So I'm going to hold it in my hand. I'm going to start applying some torque in a second. Just working my way around. Already. Just in a crossways. Just doing up little bit by little bit, pulling it down evenly. Okay, now that they're all seated, I'm going to go ahead, before I really tighten it down, and just double check the diff action. Oh, perfect. Because the last thing we want to be doing is creating any sort of binding or bowing or buckling in the case or damaging the face of the gear. Okay, so I can go ahead and tighten this down now. You can tighten it up pretty tight. They've got really good threads. Working my way around nice and even. Like so, good quality Allen drivers, really making the best work out of this. Just working my way around little bit by little bit. And that will be perfect. Okay, now I can give that a final wipe over, and I can get my hobby knife now, and I can remove this little bit of swarf around the grub screw, making sure that I do have a flat surface. In fact, I can get some emery onto that, remove that bit. making sure that there's going to be no interference for the pinion gear once it goes in the gearbox housing. Final step I will do is I'll mark the diff and I'll say exactly what's in there. I'll take my paint pen. Where is it? Sorry guys. Got my paint pen here and I'll go ahead and write 8 on it. Like so. I usually prefer to write Roman numerals. That way, definitely making it easier. There we go. All marked up, ready to go. In fact, another thing I'll do is I'll put a permanent marker, if I've got one, on the gear set as well, but you'll find that the grease will usually eat it off. There we go, clearly marked with 8. That's 8K. 8,000 weight diff oil. I'm going to do exactly the same procedure now with the center diff. Again, just going to seat the face there. Apply a little bit of grease to the face of the gasket. Like so. Now they are quite time-consuming job, these diffs, and getting them right. I'm sure there's people out there that can do them a lot faster, but I do like to take my time, ensuring that I know they're going to be reliable. Okay, so I've got my lube on there. Go ahead and mate up my pinion. Just looking for my casing marks. Here they are. Just like so. Again, just sit that up there. Get these screws started. Ensuring that no, oh, a little bit of assembly lube on there, won't go astray. A little bit tricky to assemble these on camera, to be honest. This one here. Going together really nice. I'm actually going to take these two out again. I forgot to put a bit of lube on the threads. Just an incremental amount, just to aid in the assembly. Going together really nice. Just what you'd expect from a HB Racing 8-scale buggy. Again, I'm just getting this seated before I check the diff action, making sure everything's meshed. Like so. Beautiful. Everything's spinning nice and smooth. I can go ahead now and tighten these up. It's working away in a cross pattern ensuring it's coming down nice and even. Like so. Just using a rag here to hold it to ensure I can get a good amount of torque on it. There we go. Give that a bit of a wipe over. I'll mark the diff casing exactly what oil I put in there. 8,000. Like so. Easy identification in the holder. Alright, last diff to get together, and this is just bag B. So 2 steps, quite an in-depth build these buggies. Now like I said, I haven't been rushing, I've been showing a few extra steps and techniques what I like to do. I'd really like to hear if I can do something better or something different. I don't profess to know everything. Here we go. Straight in here like that. Bit of gasket lube. Get my drive pin all nice and central. Marry it up. There we go. Bit of assembly lube on the screws. Whoops. I don't really want to tip it over and put the oil everywhere. I want to keep it inside the casing. Bit of grease on all those. This is the rear one, which will have the lightest action. And like I said, the tapping of the threads just make it go together so much nicer. And the head of the screws will be in such good nick for many rebuilds to come. Just pull it down nice and evenly so I can check the mesh. Get these all seated, and like I said, now that I've tapped it by hand, I can feel exactly where they're seating. I can do them all up nice and evenly. Diff feels super smooth. Get my rag. And I can really torque it down, knowing that the threads and the screws are both in good condition. And there we go. And the only thing I've got left over from doing this diff build are the 4 shims I need for the gearboxes, and I'll put those aside until they actually go in the gearboxes. and I shim them on an individual case, gearbox by gearbox, and this one has 4,000, like so. Clearly marked, easy identification. So there is our 3 diffs, our rear, our center, and our front. Here's my shims. I'll put these to the side. And that is page number 7 of the E819RS build. Page number 82 with the center diff. Next page will be the turnbuckles and assemblies. So I hope you've enjoyed this part of the build. It's quite a long part of the build. So we spent probably an hour building these 3 diffs. I put a few extra steps into it to show you how I do it. But yeah, I can promise you that these will not leak. They're really well sealed and they'll be really well serviceable in the future. So I'm Brett from Hearns, and this is the HB Racing E819RS build, and this is episode 2. Thanks for watching.